Hello everyone, in this lesson we're going to be looking at keyboard instruments. Now you could say to me at this point, David, are keyboard instruments a separate family just like percussion and wind and brass and the other groups of instruments that we've been looking at? And technically speaking, no they're not, because think of an organ. Organ is powered by wind, the air moves through the pipes and produces its sound that way, and so therefore the organ is kind of a wind instrument. And also the piano is almost like a percussion instrument because we use the hammers inside the piano to hit the strings, just like any other percussion instrument. But I think it's really important to know a little bit about the history of keyboard instruments because they completely changed the way that people started making music. And also, as we're trying to learn a little bit more about the way that music works, understanding how a keyboard is put together and where we can find the different notes on a keyboard will prove really useful when we're trying to learn about music theory and harmony and other topics later on. It's not surprising that lots of composers were keyboard players, because learning about the keyboard and learning to play the keyboard gives you an understanding of pretty much all parts of music. Because unlike a flute, which is most of the time used as a melodic instrument, the keyboard can play melodies, but it can also play harmony, rhythm, bass lines, and all the elements that come together to form music. An organist, for example, can produce a whole host of sounds using different settings on the organ. Let's have a look at the organ in a little more detail. The organ is like the great-grandfather of the keyboard family. Some organs existed as early as 300 BC. Although they weren't in the form that we're used to seeing today. I'm sure everyone has had the experience of going to a church or a cathedral and hearing the beautiful sound of an organ being played. It sounds enormous, and all of that sound is produced by a series of hundreds and even thousands of pipes. Sound is made by blowing air down the pipes. The design of these pipes is no more complicated than a tin whistle or a recorder. And so the organ is really a big wind instrument. Which of these pipes are used depends on which stops on the organ are pulled out. A stop is a sliding lever on the organ that is connected to a particular set of pipes that are responsible for making a particular sound. When the lever is pulled out, air is allowed to flow to those particular pipes, and so that sound is added to the overall sound of the organ. If the organist wants to produce a big, loud sound, he'll pull out more of the stops on the organ. This means that more of the pipes will be used when the player hits the keys. Another really interesting feature of the organ is that you don't just play it with your hands, you also play it with your feet. Organs are able to produce some of the lowest notes that we ever hear in music, and so to allow the player to make the most of these, a special keyboard is set out under his feet, so that he can play these extra specially low notes that the organ is able to produce. These are notes that are so low they don't even appear on the keyboard, and there's definitely no chance anyone could ever sing them. Now you might be wondering at this point, where does all this air come from? Until recently, all that air had to be pumped by hand. I can remember my granddad telling me the story of how it was his job at church every Sunday morning to operate the bellows that would pump the air around the organ, so that the organist could play the hymns for the church congregation to sing to. Nowadays, most of that air is generated automatically, but you can imagine the amount of work that it would have taken to power a really large church organ to make such a big sound. Now, of course, an organ's a great instrument to have if you have a space as big as a church or a cathedral to put it in. But a lot of people obviously don't have this amount of space, and so smaller scale keyboard instruments also begin appearing around the 14th and 15th centuries. Perhaps the most common portable keyboard instrument of this period is the harpsichord. The harpsichord is the first in a series of keyboard instruments that will have strings that are sounded in some way, rather like a guitar. On this instrument, you can see that as the keys are pressed on the keyboard, small hooks come up and pluck the strings. As you can hear, this is quite a quiet, delicate sound, but these instruments were used across Europe to play music to small gatherings of people. However, both the organ and the harpsichord have one major problem. It's not very easy to change the volume that they're playing at. Yes, the organ can sometimes have a thing called a swell box, which is a big box that sits around some of the pipes with doors on the front that you can open and close. But this is quite a laborious thing to do. Normally on an organ, these doors are operated by a foot pedal, and as you push the pedal in, the doors open and you can hear more of the sound, and so the organ appears to get louder. Equally on the harpsichord, there's a few tricks and techniques that the player can use to make their sound appear a little bit louder here and a little bit quieter there, but all of these are also a little bit cumbersome. The piano was invented by Bartolomeo Cristofori. Cristofori's great invention was to use hammers to hit the strings on a keyboard instrument instead of using hooks to pluck those strings. This meant that the player could control how loud or soft each note would sound by how hard or soft they hit the key. One of the first major composers to start working with an instrument like this was Mozart, who produced countless piano sonatas and piano concertos to show off what the instrument could do. Over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries, the piano became probably the most popular instrument for anyone to learn, and you can find it being played in huge numbers of different styles of music, ranging from classical music to rock, pop, especially jazz, with great pianists like Bill Evans and Herbie Hancock showing a huge other side to the instrument that no one had ever really explored before. Towards the cheaper end of the market, upright pianos became a fixture in people's living rooms and also in pubs and bars. This meant that musical entertainment could be provided very cheaply. Equally, towards the top end of the piano market, companies like Steinway developed beautiful instruments that were designed for the concert platform. This is a Steinway Model B, and it's capable of producing enough sound to fill an enormous concert hall. So you'll have noticed that I've been able to play all of these keyboard instruments so far, and that's because the arrangement of the keys on all of them is pretty much exactly the same. Let's have a quick look at how the keyboard is laid out. The first thing that you'll notice about a keyboard is that there are two different colours of keys, white keys and black keys. The white keys on the piano are used to play the notes with normal letter names A, B, C, D, E, F and G. The black keys on the keyboard are used to play the sharps and flats, the accidentals. So how do we find out which key on the piano is which? The easiest way to do this is to find one key which we'll use as a bass and then work our way out from there. When you start learning the piano, normally the first note you learn is C, and specifically middle C. You'll see on the keyboard that the black notes are divided into groups of 2 and 3. Directly to the left of any group of 2 black notes, that white key will be a C. From there, going up and down, it's possible to label the rest of the keys. Going up, we have D, E, F, G, A and B, before we come back to another C, and you'll see that that key is exactly to the left of the next group of 2 black notes together. So these patterns of keys repeat just the same way that the pattern of notes repeats every octave. Now we know the names of the white notes, it's really easy to name the black keys. Each black key has 2 names, and that's because each black key can be a sharp note, and each black key can also be a flat note. If we want to know the name of this black note, we need to know which keys are next to it. We can see to the left of it that this is a C, and that means that this black note is a C sharp. But that's not all, because, as I've already said, every black note has 2 names, one name as a sharp and also one name as a flat. So, to find out what its flat name is, we need to look at which key is exactly to the right of this black note. In this case, it's a D, so this note's flat name is D flat. There are some subtle differences between D flat and C sharp, but for the moment we can think of this as exactly the same thing. So now we know this, we can go and label all the other black keys on the keyboard. Here's D sharp or E flat, F sharp or G flat, G sharp or A flat, A sharp or B flat. The great thing is, once you've learnt this pattern, you'll see that it repeats over and over again. So actually, learning to find your way around the keyboard is much easier than it might appear. So that's a brief introduction to keyboard instruments. How about the next time you see a piano sitting in a corner of a room, go and have a quick play. See if you can find a note C, and then see what other notes you can find.